I could share with you, a little bit of feedback from what we're trying to do with Dicerra, which is something similar. People can voice up, hey, I did this and it didn't work out. And it's very non-punitive. So we protect, we make sure there's a level of content moderation where we can trap people and prevent somebody's name from being thrown to the wolves. And we thought, A/B testing with a few hundred folks across North America to get input. And we thought maybe we need to demonstrate what a healthy culture looks like to people who haven't seen it before. So we'll interleave some aviation posts from people who are very familiar with this culture already. And we'll combine our two platforms so that when you first log on, every second post is an aviator saying, here's all the dumb stuff I did, as a way of showing like it's okay to share, and it actually makes everyone better. I'm not sure that we're going to continue with the model of keeping the aviation interleaved with the healthcare, because we've also had some feedback that people just, they're not interested in the other profession. But I 100% think that that's an awesome path forward. I share your perspective on even the catharsis for an individual of just being able to share it and know that you're not going to be blamed for it, because we are human. And one thing that I will give to healthcare over aviation is, often they're compared and contrasted as being very similar. We want to borrow techniques from one and kind of overlay it on the other as though it's a perfect match. But healthcare is much more, and you will know this better than anybody, being a helicopter pilot and a physician. Healthcare seems significantly, an order of magnitude more complex. And when we talk about simulation in aviation, we have a cockpit that is an absolute replica of the aircraft that you're going to fly, with visuals that are as close to what you can expect to see, and you will run over an emergency in a really controlled manner, probably almost exactly the way it would be represented in the aircraft. But human body is a lot more complex than that. And you can use simulation training, but I imagine, and you probably got firsthand experience, that sometimes symptoms are not well presented in one patient as compared with another with exactly the same problem. And sometimes there's abnormalities within the human body where you're trying to react to an issue, and whatever procedure you have in place for the 99% doesn't work on the 1%. And then a million other very complex variables that make healthcare much more difficult. So maybe, going back to the point you mentioned earlier about the difference in mentality when you have that immediate SOP, that immediate action, and then you have to make a decision as a doctor, and you're drawing from maybe an experience you had 10 years ago and some advice you had from somebody else 5 years ago, and you're seeing this condition for the first time, maybe ever. How do you deal with the complexity, and how do you deal with, what we would call proficiency or lack of proficiency in aviation, where if you haven't practiced a maneuver for a long time, you have to go back and either do it in the sim or practice it airborne. And you don't have that luxury in healthcare. You might be doing a procedure once, in a blue moon. And when you have to execute it, it has to go well. How do you deal with that as a physician? Is there anything that you can borrow from aviation, or is it really so different that you have to take a different approach?
There's a lot we can borrow from aviation that we don't. One is the approach to training. And something I noticed coming out of the military, military's pretty good at training. The military's got a lot of problems, but one thing it does well is train, because most of the military, when I was in sort of warfighting roles, you spend more time training than you do actually doing your job. In later years in the conflict in Afghanistan, there were probably soldiers that spent more time fighting than training. But certainly when I joined, there weren't a lot of wars going on, and we spent a lot of time training. So we're very good at organizing training, determining what the training needs. We were good at saying, and there were whole courses on training needs analysis. Non-commissioned officers went to these courses on how to develop training. You were taught how to run training as part of the officer training. Okay, what's the competency that I need? To what level of that competency? Is it just understanding? Is it competency, or is it unconscious competence? And then you work it back to the terminal, the test, the build up to the test. If it's counterterrorism, you say, right, the endpoint needs to be, I need an individual to enter a room and be able to put 2 bullets through the brainstem in an instinctive manner. I need that person to have instinctive levels of shooting. So they need to start with learning how the weapon works, and then dry firing, then live firing, and then weeks on the range just getting used to instinctive shooting, and then a fully immersive live firing with lots of people in the room and noise going off and lights and light and dark, and for months at a time till it becomes instinctive. I go to medical school. There is no list of competencies. It's just a general sense that you'll spend a few years tooling around university and the hospital, learning stuff. And at the end of it, there's an exam, but you just sort of drift into the job with a general understanding that, wow, it's a vocation and you'll learn on the job. You go to specialty training, same kind of deal. It's there's this terrible expression in medicine called see one, do one, teach one. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's actually really common. So I remember as an intern, I needed to do a lumbar puncture, put a needle into someone's back to get a sample of cerebral spinal fluid. I hadn't done one before. So I said to my registrar, hey, the patient needs a lumbar puncture. And she went, sure, we'll go do it. I said, yeah, but I haven't done one. So in the corridor, she tries to explain to me how to do it. Well, it's not that hard. You just sort of feel across the top of the pelvis and sort of draw an imaginary line there, and then feel between the bones, and then just keep poking the needle until the fluid comes back. I said, sure. Can you show me? Like, you know, people under pressure, we've got lots of patients. So she comes in, she sort of hurriedly shows me how to do it. Okay, you're done. So that's you qualified now because you've seen one. That's the most training you're going to get in sticking a needle in someone's back. The next time you do it, you can now teach someone else. Now think of all the things that might not have been taught properly. Think of primacy of learning. Think of, you know, were you ever being tested that you're doing it? And no one will ever see you do that again, potentially. It's completely autonomous practice. So the system around training is, there is no system of training.
Is there an expectation, maybe a cultural one, that once you achieve a certain level of education, that instinctively makes you just a good instructor or a good teacher, a great lecturer, without needing any additional training?
Absolutely. And this sort of moves on to your second question around, so the first question is around training. That there really isn't any. And the notion around training is not really there. There's not a system that says, okay, we need people to learn how to intubate, put a bit of plastic into their trachea. We must be able to break this down into steps and run it as a formal course with a mannequin and then some supervised training in a very structured way by people who are trained to instruct. And then you would sit an exam, a course, a practical assessment, you'd be signed off. But it's almost like medicine says, well, there's far too many skills for us to do that. Actually, there wouldn't be. You could absolutely, I mean, Christ, look at flying a fighter jet. You don't start on day one by getting put into the jet, I assume. You're built up through years. That's the end point. So of course you can break it down into steps. There's no skill that can't be broken into steps to train, but that's not the culture. So, and in medicine, when I finished my anesthetic training to be a consultant, there's an exam of my theoretical knowledge, but there's no practical assessment. You know, when I get my license to be a helicopter pilot, I can examine it from CASA. You know, we have an hour in his office with him Q&Aing me, and then we go flying for 3 hours where we do everything and all the emergencies. And I mean, it's exhausting, right? I mean, check flights, you've been there.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, there's a sense that, right, I've met the standard. In medicine, there's not that same level. The general culture is you have to do a lot of it. So this comes back to some of this fatigue rules is, as a consultant, I look back at the trainees and go, well, if you're going to do half the hours, the training might need to be twice as long. So instead of taking 5 years of specialty training, maybe it needs to be 10. Because in that level of fatigue, I've done hundreds of those procedures because I was in the hospital for so much. You've done dozens of that procedure. So you haven't yet run into the problems that you should have because you haven't done enough. So that's this part of why, as senior clinicians, we're like, well, it's fine just to say safe work hours, but we have a general sense that you need to do a certain amount of stuff, volume of practice to be good at it. But no one's really defined that either. So there's no real sense of what good training should look like. Now, in terms of how we cope with complexity, my experience has been actually the more complex something is, the more I'm using my human factors training than my technical knowledge and my experience. I've reached a point now, if I'm team leading the most complex trauma that we get horrendously complex trauma, and we're doing more and more and more to patients now than we've ever done in the past. So I might have, I think last time we counted 25 people in operating theatre from 4 different surgical teams, and you're running all of that. The more experience I get, the more I actually keep my brain empty. And I got that concept from a helicopter pilot instructor who said to me on one flight, Bill, 30% of your working memory should be free at all times for the unexpected emergency. 30% of your brain needs to be empty all of the time that you're flying. What a concept. So he said, you probably didn't notice it, but you just gave your call sign in the wrong order. Instead of Alpha Bravo Charlie, you gave Charlie Bravo Alpha. Did you realize that? I went, oh, no, I didn't. He goes, that's a sign to yourself that you're getting fatigued. You need to pick up on these signs when you're a single pilot. So recognize that it's happened, recognize why it's happened, and start to cognitively offload, because your brain's full. So when the engine goes quiet, you're not going to be able to cope with it because your brain's too full of all the other stuff. Maybe offload tasks to ATC. Maybe if you've got a passenger, give them a map. It might look unprofessional, but you have to rapidly cognitive offload. So I've applied this in this sort of team leader setting where I go, someone will hand me a blood test result for the patient, and I think I don't need to interpret that. There's tons of doctors in the room that can do that. So I'll just hand it to someone else. I delegate absolutely everything because I don't need to fly the plane as such. I've got enough people that can do that. I can actually stand back from all of it and be A, available to information, B, maintain situational awareness because I'm not diving into a task, and I actively keep my brain empty. I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's very counter to the way medicine's taught. If there's a cognitive aid, I'll use it. You think about the way we teach medicine, our first experiences of being a doctor are standing at a bedside with our ties on, feeling very sweaty and nervous, with our shiny new stethoscopes around our necks and our bundles of notes and pens, and a very senior professor of something with a bow tie or some such thing in front of a patient. And it's just training by humiliation. You're basically, Mr. Bestic, is it? As they look at your ID card. Why don't you tell me the differentials of a gentleman with crackles in their lower left base? Come on, you should know this. And when you don't know it, you are put down and someone else, oh, excuse me, sir, excuse me, I know this. So the culture is, if you don't have all the knowledge in your head, you're going to be a bad doctor. Now imagine if the ward round said, if you don't know this, I'll wait, you can Google it. Because this is exactly what you're going to do when you're a junior doctor. You're going to Google it. So why don't you Google it, and then I'll tell you whether that source is actually right or not. Why don't you set up some cognitive aids in your phone? Because you're all going to carry your phone. It's a walking computer. You can have cognitive aids for everything, but your challenge is going to be how to access the right aid at the right time. Because if you pick the wrong aid, you'll get confirmation bias and you'll be down the wrong pathway. So we should be being taught how to use the aid, not you're not allowed to use the aid.
Yeah.
So the training, the culture is different. How do I cope with complexity? I use all the non-medical stuff I've learned, not the medical stuff I've learned.
I wonder if that culture comes from, that comes from a time pre-smartphone, and the doctor had to carry around as much knowledge through rote memorization and experience as possible. Of course, now we have these extra tools, and you can probably increase the safety of care and the quality of care because you can access new tools. So don't deprive yourself of those tools. Use them, like you said, leverage them to the best of your ability. And I wonder as well, you're talking about stepping back, keeping your situational awareness by being able to delegate to team members. I wonder how much that has come from your background in SOF as well, where from a command perspective, you don't want to be too far down in the weeds because you need perspective. You don't want your bucket to be full. You want to have additional capacity. You want to have your bubble way, way, way out in front to be able to think about all the what ifs. And that requires effective delegation, and then it requires trust that the people you're delegating to are competent and that they can do what you've asked them to do, which I assume, especially in SOF, you have that's a little more of a flat hierarchy perhaps than elsewhere in the military, where even down to the lowest levels, people are trusted to be highly, highly competent, especially in a small team. So do you credit some of the way that you're approaching scenarios like you just described as well to some of your military background?
Oh, definitely. I think I've been through a transition where I came out of the military and tried to lead in the military way, and it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. The language is one part. You can't be dropping F-bombs and C-bombs all during brief, which is quite normal in the military.
Yep.
People don't bat an eyelid. All of a sudden, people's eyes are getting wider and wider while you're just chatting, and you're thinking, why are they looking at me like that? It's like, oh, people don't talk like that. Okay, I get it. I mean, that's one of it. The other is we use direct language. We are trained from the start that things work better when someone's in charge. So we subscribe to the model that having a leader means a better outcome, that actually having a not great leader is still better than not having any leadership at all. So we kind of buy into that, so that and we wear our rank openly. We know who's in charge. We can look around the room and go, who's in charge? Me, because I'm the most senior rank, until the next senior rank walks in. Now, in the civilian worlds and medical thing, there's actually the same hierarchy, but no one overtly wears the rank. But everyone understands the hierarchy, sort of. So what I found was I would come in and generally make assumptions that people would accept that I'm in charge and running. But that's a dangerous way to start something. So yeah, I had to modify the leadership to almost get permission to lead. And that frustrated me initially, because in a time-critical situation, I'm a big subscriber to authoritative leadership. We're taught Steve Adair's models of leadership of participative and free rein authoritative, and you go, the time for participative leadership is over. You will do what I tell you, and you'll do it when I tell you to do it, or you'll leave the room. Now that'll get you through that particular situation, and you've got all the skills to get louder and more forceful and use your parade voice if you have to, right? You can really dominate from that military training. But good luck doing it the next time, because people are going to turn off that style really quickly. So I got starting to get feedback that, my style was not working, was inappropriate, was too forceful, too intimidating. And in a culture where, people aren't loving that kind of white male approach to things, that it's time to recognize that the room has changed and that you need to modify that.
When you say getting permission from to lead, what kind of soft skills are you alluding to there?
Someone taught me very early on in my officer training. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he said, in a crisis, people look to the leader. They physically look at the leader. And that may not be you, even though you're the platoon commander. But you'll know who the leader is. And the first time I was involved in a real gunfight, I remember crouching in the jungle and hearing shots going off and being worried for my own safety. And it was very confusing. It wasn't like we did in training where it was very clear what the problem was. we didn't train enough for confusion and actually having to lead when you have no idea what to do. You know, in the military training was kind of, you work out what to do, then you do it. But I think in real-time combat situations, you actually spend a long period of time making decisions in the total absence of really knowing what's even going on. But you have to keep making those decisions. You can't just be stunned. And you actually fall back on these maxims that you used to think were a joke, but are actually quite useful. Things like, when you're not sure what to do, move towards the sound of gunfire and kill everything you find. They empower you to do something. Can't use these analogies in a medical setting, right? It doesn't wash as well.
Doesn't translate. No.
Maybe you could modify it. Move towards the sound of people dying and save all the people in your path. I don't know. There's probably an analogy. But I remember crouching in the jungle, and I had some soldiers left and right of me, and I looked to my left and they were looking at me, and I thought they were looking at something else, and I looked to my right and they were looking at me, and I had that moment where I thought, oh, they're waiting for me to make a decision. So I just made a decision. Said, go that way. I don't know if that was the right thing to do. I don't know if it was the right direction, but it got us moving instead of doing nothing. And at that time, that's what needed to happen. We'd lost momentum. So, recognizing that if you want to be a good leader in the workplace, every time you interact with someone or do something, it's setting the conditions for that moment. You bring history to the room in a good and a bad way. If you've got a history of being a collaborative, thoughtful, caring leader that kind of knows their shit, then guess what? People want you in the room, and when you turn up, they're going to be glad that you arrived. That's what we all want. But if you're kind of a dick, or you're really mean to people, or actually you're a bit incompetent, people aren't going to want you in the room. If you don't have insight into your own performance and how to improve it, then you're never going to get better. We're a highly critical society and environment. You're never going to get everybody on side, and it's dealing with which part of this criticism is just someone being mean and which part is actually important. That great concept that feedback is a gift. If I can get feedback about my performance, it might not be packaged in the way I want to hear it, but there's a reason someone's saying that to me. I've got to fix something. So I did a lot more of, instead of me internalizing everything and then giving the direction, which would work in the military, I don't need to justify my decision to my soldiers in a combat situation. I tell them to do something and they do it. If they don't like it, afterwards we'll have it out. But they won't question it at the time because we believe in the system of leadership in the military. We subscribe to that. We agree. We've all agreed on that set of rules. Medical people haven't agreed on those sets of rules. They've never even been explicitly discussed. Leadership's never taught or even discussed. It was mentioned in that coroner's report that there was a lack of leadership, but that's as far as it went. In fact, with a really good leader, it might have gone just fine because everyone had the skills in the room, but they weren't harnessed. There was no one keeping their brain free. They were all engaged in an activity and they got cognitively loaded. But that's not, systems not even the coroner can work out that that's probably the biggest problem in the room. So dealing with that complexity, I found, keep it simple, keep dragging it back to doing the simple stuff well. Because in our efforts to be too good and too sharp and too clever, we're going to miss the simple stuff. And the simple stuff is what kills people.
Really like your comment there on you bring your history with you into the room. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it because people need to understand that their reputation will follow them. And the flip side of that, I suppose, is it needs to be nurtured over a period of time. So you need to earn your leadership daily. And if you falter, all that history and goodwill that you've built up over, it doesn't matter anymore. Everything you've done, everything you've built, it can fall away so quickly. Really, really interesting way of putting that. And I want to, we're running a little bit short on time, so we'll make this the last question, and we can kind of, we can see where it goes for 15 minutes. You mentioned You know, when people are looking to you as the leader, and in the situation that you gave before in a gunfight where you have to do something, you don't want to be in decision paralysis. So in the medical context, I assume that decision paralysis could come maybe from two different ends of the spectrum. It could come from not enough information, or it could come from having way too much information and then being paralyzed and not knowing what to do. How do you balance between those two ends of the spectrum when you're trying to make the right decision and then impart that upon your team?
Yeah, this happens a lot, actually, particularly in severe trauma. You don't get any, I mean, more frequently, patients are coming directly to the operating theatre from the helipad or screaming from we bring the ambulance stretcher directly into the theatre. We bypass the emergency department completely. So the patient arrives straight off the injury. They might have scooped them run, put them on a stretcher, brought them in, and that person might be in pieces. So you don't know the extent of their injury. There's lots of noise in the room. Nurses are pulling open surgical packs. Surgeons are arriving. People are crashing into the room. You don't even know everyone in the room. Everyone's dressed. You don't even know their names. They've got masks on. You don't know if that's a surgeon or a scrub nurse or an orderly. Those are situations where I find I immediately start to feel overwhelmed. I'm worried about my own performance. I've got fear that I'm going to make an error, that I'm going to miss something really important, that the patient's going to die, and afterwards someone will go, "You missed that? Really? How do you miss that?" Because always in that hindsight and retrospective scope, it's really obvious what the problem was. So I find in those situations, I've got to take a breath. You know, the first pulse you take is your own. You control yourself before you control the environment. I'm acute. It's like I leave my body. I imagine what everyone else sees when they look at me, and I need to give them what they need to see. I need to look like I'm calm. I want to take a minute to control my voice. I learned a lot of this from yes, the military, but also from aviation. When we speak, when we transmit, when we're flying, that's a very considered statement. We don't press the transmit button and just start talking. We have thought about what we're going to say in the way that we're going to say it. And if it's an emergency, we also want to make sure we sound cool. Because we don't want our last transmission to be us wailing like a baby on the transmission, right? So right. These are the rules of special forces. 1, know your shit. 2, look cool. 3, if you don't know your shit, look cool anyway. So we get quite accustomed to taking a breath and then delivering it in a very, we've got obviously strict phraseology as well, but we give consideration to how we're transmitting. So if I take a breath and give a thought to the first thing out of my mouth and how I deliver it, it's going to set a tone. It doesn't matter whether my head's still spinning, but I have to give the impression that it's not. So I'm faking it a bit, but people need to see that someone's in charge. Otherwise, it will unravel. And then I think, right, and I drop back to airway, breathing, circulation. I dumb it down to the simplest possible things. I don't try to overreach. I even say to myself, 80% solution on time is better than 100% late. It's better that I do the basics well and miss something rare and complex that they die of than pursue the most awesome, amazing, kick-ass resuscitation, but miss the fact that we didn't even put the tube in the right place. So calm down, let the situation play, listen to the noise, listen to the room, really tap into your environment, and don't over-control it. There has to be a level of noise. There might be times where you get everyone to be quiet, but those moments that you transmit, it's how you say it is as important as what you say. It's got to be short and sharp and directed. And there will be afterwards, it'll never meet your own standard. There's no time I do something where I feel, yeah, man, there was nothing to fix there. And that's, when I did forward air controlling with 14 and 2 Squadron in New Zealand on the Air Mackie and Skyhawk, and they would take us up flying. And what really struck me about those fighter squadrons is how critical they are of each other. The debrief is longer than the flight, and there is nothing that's not picked up. but it's never taken personally. It's always an understanding that this is important if we want to be better at what we do, and we do want to be better at what we do. So, yeah, we can be our own worst enemy. And sometimes when I've gone to mentors, they're like, "You're overthinking it, mate. You did a good job. Let it go." But it still burns you. I don't want to make that error again. And that's why I think we talked at the start here about performance, and perhaps the aviation medical model. People are getting a bit worn out of that model. So you can look to other fields, the All Blacks or pick any high performing sports team. They have all these cultures. They know that fatigue, they're not going to keep the team up the night before the game. They're going to make sure they've got a quiet, temperature controlled environment to sleep in. They're going to control their diet. They're going to control their attitude, their stress, all of that, if they want a good performance. So it's like, if you want to be a high performer, well, guess what fighter pilots do, and All Blacks do, and Special Forces do? They all have exactly the same approach to performance. And the beauty of it is that it's highly learnable. All of us have the ability to do it. Most of us are not innately talented at things. Some of us are better at things than others. Most of us get there just through hard graft and application. You've got insight into your performance and you want to get better. You don't have to do much to be a lot better. But the highest yield is actually around human factors, not technical ability. Medicine's very bad for this. We put huge emphasis on how good I am at a technical procedure. Can I put a cannula in? Can I intubate? Can I do a lumbar puncture without having 5 goes at it? But we don't put any metric on, did I actually speak to the patient? When I asked them why they're having surgery and they said they only got told last week they got cancer and start crying, there's no metric for saying you were a compassionate human when they started crying. The metric starts with the procedure. So junior doctors, if they're being watched by a senior doctor, will want to be really good at the procedure because that's what they're most stressed about. The more cognitive space they've got, the more they'll be a human to the patient. That's the doctor you and I want. I'm not actually fussed if the doctor misses the cannula on me 3 times, as long as I know they're highly professional and they have my interests at heart and all the rest of it, right? So it's switching the metric, and I think all of us have the ability to tap into this gold mine where the highest yield, once you've learnt your basic trade, really it's attitude and insight that's going to make you really, really good. And you don't have to be amazing at any job. You've only got to be good enough.
Mate, that is an excellent point that I think we can wrap up on. Really, really thrilled to have had you join us for this podcast. And I think I'd like to have you back because there were 100 questions that are constantly going through my head is that we could have pursued so many different avenues. You've got a ton to offer, and we only just scratched the absolute surface, just the tip of the iceberg. So, we'll reach out again and try and coordinate a time that works for you as well. But I want to give the last words to you. Any parting thoughts that you want our viewers and our listeners to take away from this episode?
I want to really acknowledge and commend you for what you're doing. I'm probably at risk of feeling overwhelmed by my frustration with things not being as good as they could be. And my response has been to become increasingly siloed. But I'm really encouraged and motivated by people like yourself who see that as a challenge to take it on and make it better. And if we don't have people like you doing that, it won't ever get better. And I think Dicerra is a great start to actually starting that conversation, because there's probably a whole lot of like-minded people out there. We just don't really have a voice. And we feel a bit silenced. So I think what you're doing is commendable. If I finish with a bit of an anecdote that I read about a book I read, he's a war surgeon. And he's traveling the world, operating in far-flung places. And he's also a pilot, commercial pilot. So I loved it. It's a great book called War Doctor, I think. And he's on a helicopter and he's flying over this massive refugee camp in the Middle East somewhere. And there's something like 1 million people in this refugee camp, or some incredible number, right? And the guy he happens to be sitting next to, he doesn't know him. He's another civilian. And he says to the civilian next to him through the headset, I've been operating near this refugee camp, and I reckon there's at least 20, 25 people that I managed to save through my surgery. And the guy next to him went, oh, wow, that's fantastic. That's great. And the surgeon says to the guy, what do you do? He goes, I'm a water engineer. We just put fresh water into that refugee camp. And he thinks he's probably just saved 500,000 people with a one water pipe, and I'd saved 20. And it made him reflect on, if I really want to do the most good for the most people, I'd be a water engineer. So in actual fact, solving malaria, fixing mosquito problems, solving poverty, save far more people than the one at a time that I might be doing in the operating theatre. So what you're doing has a far greater impact on actually saving lives by even just fatigue. If we just solve the fatigue issue and approach fatigue in a different way in the healthcare industry, millions of lives would be saved every year. So what you're doing is actually having a far greater impact, and we just need to keep hearing that message.
Thanks so much, Bill. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, and
pleasure,
I can't wait to talk to you again soon, mate. Cheers.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. See ya.
Cheers.